Hey guys, how's it going? This is Ken Spangenberg. I'm here today with Jamie Shevchik, the head coach at Keystone College, and also the head coach, or is it manager, of the Brewster Whitecaps. I see we have
Manager.
Ryan Smythe coming in too. So guys, before we get going, Coach Shev was actually the first coach to ever hire me. So there's a lot of pressure for me on my end for this. But yeah, graduating from college, I got to work at Keystone my first year. Coach let me try to not mess up the infielders. But before we get rolling, because I know he's not going to brag for himself, I want to give you a little bit of a rundown of Coach's success because he is at a smaller college. Sometimes people haven't heard of it. But how many years have you been there now?
Almost 20 years, just about
Almost
20.
20. So in those 20 years, Coach's record is 599 and 202, meaning he basically wins 8 out of 10 games he plays. They've had 4 40-win seasons, 12 30-plus win seasons, and then 2 20-plus win seasons. They've made 2 College World Series. They were runner-up in 1. And then he actually won, would it be called the Cape Cod Championship? What's that called?
Yeah, the Cape Cod League Championship.
So like the Cape Cod League, the one that you guys all want to play in, he's the head coach there as well in the summer. And they won it, what was it, 2 years ago?
In 2017, yep.
2017. On top of that, you know, the amount of times leading the NCAA in a ton of different statistical categories. They've won their conference title. Was it 15 years in a row?
15 years in a row, yeah.
15 years in a row, and I think it's 7 or 8 draft picks in this decade. Right?
Yeah, we've had almost over 30 professional players since 2010, either being drafted, signed as a free agent, or gone to independent leagues. We made a transition from a 2-year school, a junior college, to a 4-year school, and luckily every single year that we've been at the 4-year level, we've won the conference championship. So it's going to be really weird the day that comes when it doesn't happen.
So guys, when we talk about like not writing schools off because you never heard of them, this is maybe like the perfect example, because their baseball success is just off the charts, absolutely off the charts. So why don't we start off with, you know, how you got into coaching? So obviously you played college baseball. Like, what was that transition like going from player to coach?
Yeah, I was an average college baseball player. Didn't have anything that resembled a career for me to continue to be playing. And I was able to, I actually applied when I was like 23 years old. I applied for the head coaching job at my high school, the JV head coaching job. And I got denied. I got turned down the job. And a week later, I had the opportunity to go be the pitching coach at Keystone. And I was young, 21, 22 years old, whatever it might be. So I took it. And I started under Mike Collins, who's now the head coach at Bloomsburg University. And I was the pitching coach there for 2 years. And when Mike left and took an assistant coaching job at Binghamton University, I was able to step right in. And to be honest with you, I never knew at that point that I've ever wanted to be a college baseball coach, but I was luckily given the opportunity, and I kind of just ran with it from there.
That's awesome. And I feel like that's a lot of coaches we talk to. You know, it's not necessarily a plan. You fall into it and then realize just how amazing an opportunity is to work with these young guys, compete on a daily basis, and not go and work in a cubicle or anything that's brutal.
I can't imagine doing anything else at this point. Like I said, back then I wasn't sure of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to stay in baseball, but I just didn't know at what level or what aspect. Right. I thought it was always going to be a hobby for me, but to make a career out of it, and to be at that institution at Keystone for so long, it's been pretty cool. And I can't imagine ever doing anything else at this point.
Oh, for sure. And I wish we had some pictures for these guys, because I remember going up there as like a teenager. And the fence is literally like the wooden, what are they, like fence posts. So it wasn't even a real fence. And that was probably like 2002, 2003. You probably took over shortly after, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the soccer field was in our outfield. And we had this hideous backstop and the dugout. And for what they're doing to the field and the stadium and the stuff that they're building around there right now, it's going to be pretty cool to see moving forward for next spring or even in the fall.
Oh, for sure. I'll have to throw up some pictures of the stadium towards the end. But if you told me, like, just think about those list of accolades I read off, guys. Like, if you saw this old field, you would not think that the time between like 2002, 2003, and 2020, like that stuff would have happened. So it's really cool. So obviously, like I said, you've had a lot of success and a lot of consistent success. What do you attribute to that?
Uh, Listen, I say this a lot. I think there's high school coaches out there that know more about the game of baseball than I do, and I really do believe that. I was fortunate enough, I think, to surround myself with, I just saw Coach Smythe was on here, and coaches like yourself. Over the years, we've had a really good network of guys that have got out on the road and recruited and put in a lot of time, and I think no matter how good of a coach you are, you always have to have the horses. So we've been blessed with years and years of really good baseball players and really good coaches that are committed to Keystone, beyond, whatever else they want to do in their careers. And that has to be the foundation of where our success has been for years now.
For sure. So that's almost like the network, right? It's the coaches, it's the guys who are helping out the players. So let's
Yeah.
rewind a little bit. Obviously, the players play a big role in this. So when you guys are recruiting for players, what are you looking for particularly? Because like I said, we have a bunch of 21s, 22s, high school guys on here. So I'm sure they're curious, like if they want to play at a legit program, what are some things that they want to see?
Our recruiting style is a little bit different than probably at most institutions. And you know that, and a lot of people who do know our program know that. Primarily what we're looking for is, we want to get as many guys on campus in the fall, and we're going to sit down and we're going to have conversations with those guys. And part of that conversation is, I know that I'm not necessarily recruiting for, that kid's freshman year in college. I'm possibly recruiting for, when that kid's a sophomore and a junior. I mean, at Keystone, we get a lot of transfer kids. Because think about this way. I mean, let me put it into perspective for a lot of guys. And you mentioned this, earlier when you were talking. There's not a lot of players that grow up in the Northeast that have dreams and hopes of going to play baseball at a Division III school in Northeastern Pennsylvania. It just doesn't happen. Do we go out and we try to get some of the better freshmen that are out there? Of course we do. It doesn't always happen. But what we're really good at is trying to get a lot of those kids, or we always get some of those kids that end up somewhere else at a Division II school, Division I school, and they end up coming back. The reason that I like kids like that is because, think about it, guys, when you're 17 years old or you're 16 years old, you, just like me and everybody else and Coach Spange, we all have aspirations and dreams of playing baseball in Omaha in July. We all want to play at the highest level. I get that. So we're never going to write off a kid who thinks, that's what their goals are going to be. But your priorities are going to change when you're 18 years old, and your priorities are going to change again when you're 19 years old. When the light is at the end of the tunnel of your college career being over, a lot of kids decide to make changes then. And now in college baseball, we don't recommend, transferring to 2 different schools or 3 different schools, but in reality, a lot of those kids do. So when your dreams are now about, they change and you become a little bit more mature as a person, and now it becomes about winning, being part of something that's really special, having a legitimate chance of winning a conference championship and playing in an NCAA regional and playing in the College World Series. Stuff like that are things that you're going to remember for the rest of your lives. And when kids realize that, we've been the benefit of a lot of those players over the years. So again, we're going to recruit the best kind of freshmen we can, but we're also going to concentrate on some of those kids that are looking to reprioritize their careers and what they want to do in baseball, if that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. I think some of these guys might have to go through the process to fully understand it, but that's like anything in life, right? Sometimes you have to make the wrong decision to find the right one. So what would your advice?
If you think about of the 30 guys that have played professional baseball out of our program, including the 8 guys that were drafted, there's only been 3 of those kids who came into Keystone as a freshman. Most of those guys have all started somewhere else. And honestly, in my opinion, Think about those kids now being the big fish in the small pond playing Division III baseball in the Northeast. We've got just as many professional baseball scouts in the Northeast as there is in Florida. And those scouts in Pennsylvania and the Northeast, they have a job to do. They've got to get guys drafted. So those guys end up having some pretty good careers at Keystone. And obviously they have the chance to play baseball after that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we always tell our guys when we're looking at colleges is it's really tough to get better when you're not playing. So to go to a roster that's full with some upperclassmen, who are getting some scholarship money, who you just don't get opportunities. So it might be better to go to a school like you're saying that has a track record of developing guys, an opportunity to play a little bit sooner rather than later, and stand out.
Yeah, I got to get on the field.
For sure. So we talked about this a little bit, but I think one of the things I was most impressed with is the consistency of winning. I don't think it's that hard to have one really good year. I think it's really hard to have 18 in a row. Besides coaches, what are some contributors to that long-term success?
I hate to use the word culture because, it's used too loosely, especially in college. If you guys have noticed, anytime somebody gets a new job out there, they always say the same thing. It's my job to come in and change the culture. I'm going to change the culture of the program that I'm going in there. Anytime they don't have success, they always blame it on bad culture. And the job of the next coach that comes in, his job is to immediately change the culture. And I disagree with that. I think as coaches, we can create an environment for our guys to be successful, which means give them the luxury to grow as baseball players, give them some slack, pull it back when we need to. I think that culture is organic. I can go back and look at the best teams that we've ever had, whether it was the championship in the Cape Cod League, the 2 years that we went to the World Series, the year that we played in the national championship game. There was something special about those kids that we couldn't teach, we couldn't create. And that's where I feel like, the character of a kid and the personality of a kid, that's what creates the culture of a baseball team. And that's what creates the culture of a program that has success over the years. We do a good job, myself, and I think our coaches, of giving those kids the environment to do well in, maintaining a relationship with our players where they know that we have their back. And it goes way beyond the 4 years or the 3 years that they're in college. And I almost want to feel like my coaching philosophy is treat your kids and have a relationship with your players where they feel like they're going to let you down if we don't accomplish a certain goal. That's powerful. That's really powerful. You can imagine what kids can do knowing that their coach has their back and you care about those kids and what they're going to do for you to make sure that we get to our goals, and obviously they're going to get to theirs as well. So I think that's a huge part of what we're trying to do and what we've been really good at from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point. I mean, now that I'm not around college as much, I'm around youth baseball, and I can tell you, especially at the younger ages, kid screws up, guess who he's looking at? He's looking at coach, and he's looking at the parents, and there's not much difference between that and college. Kid messes up, everyone on the field knows they did. It's not soccer where they can play for 60 minutes and no one knows who's good and who's bad.
Right.
If your guys can look at you and get confidence after screwing up, like you said, that's really powerful.
And I think I've developed into that type of coach because of, some of the kids that we've had over the years. When you're recruiting some kids that are bounce back kids or transfer kids, sometimes those kids are coming to you for different reasons. The saying is that I always love to hear is, rock bottom has created so many more championships than the guys that have been handed everything in their life. And we get a lot of those kids. And I think that's kind of molded me and changed me into the person that I am and the coach that I am too.
No, that's really interesting to hear. So you actually mentioned this when you were just talking. So I'm curious to see if there are some different traits that the best teams you've had all shared.
Yeah, absolutely. They were motivated and driven to kind of play outside themselves and play for other reasons other than themselves. And this was the most evident of the Cape Cod League in 2017, because there's a lot of things that happen in that team. We were by far probably the least talented team in the Cape. We had a couple guys that were really good, but we were almost like the runts of the litter compared to some of those guys, the other teams in the league. And, we had Hunter Bishop on our team at the time, Hunter went in the, I think he was a 5th overall pick last year. But he was only a sophomore, a freshman coming out of out of college. So he still had a lot of growing to do, but he had some personal things going on in his life. His mother was suffering from Alzheimer's. He was, from California to Massachusetts trying to play baseball. A lot of our guys kind of gravitated around that. This is something we talk about all the time. One day, a kid takes his hat and inside the hat is for mom, which was Hunter's, his charity that he started for his mother. Then another guy did it. Then another guy did it. It wasn't orchestrated. Nobody talked about it. Guys just started to do stuff like that. And I think when you have stuff like that in your program, it's such a motivating factor. It's almost like playing with 15 guys on the field. And when we went to the World Series in 2016, the national championship game, I wasn't convinced at one point that we were going to win our conference championship. I just didn't think that we were going to be that good, and we weren't that good. But something clicked along the way. That's when Sean Murphy, one of our former players, passed away that same season, who was about to get into the big leagues. And our guys started to rally around that. They were carrying his jersey around. They were motivated by something that I couldn't create or nobody could create. It had to just happen. So I think the best teams that I've ever been around, you can trace that back to something in the kid's character, or something that happened that really pushed those guys forward.
Yeah, I really think that's interesting. And that's definitely like a reoccurring theme that we've heard from different coaches and players. It's just being genuine. Like you can tell, like I like what you said about culture, which is really interesting. Culture now is just a buzzword. So the fact that the players are creating it, I think really means a lot.
Absolutely. And you just can't bring that out. It's hard to do in the recruiting cycle, to bring that out of the kids. But I think the way that we are as coaches, we allow some of that stuff to come out individually. And we have created, a little bit of culture for a long time, but it's always done by the players.
So this is a tough question. I'm going to preface with that. So if you're a recruit, you're on campus, what are some things you would look for to figure out what type of coaching staff and what kind of, I'm not going to use the word culture, what kind of environment that college has?
If I'm a recruit?
Yeah, if you're one of these guys.
Well, if I'm a recruit, you guys are going to sit in front of coaches probably for the next couple of years. Some of you may have already done it already. I think one of the things that you've got to really look into is the coach genuine? We are all supposed to be car salesmen. Our job is to sell you with whatever we possibly can to get you to our institutions. But I know you guys are smarter than that. And I think what I tell my assistant coaches and both myself is when we talk to these kids, we've got to be genuine. We've got to be honest. We've got to tell them what our goals are for them. We have to explain how we're going to help them get those goals. And we've got to be there for them. I remember, telling a recruit, a shortstop, and if you come to Keystone, very rarely are you ever going to get turned down for any extra work. Our door is always wide open for you. And I think that starts the process of the relationship. But I think some things that you've got to look for is it an environment where you feel like you're going to be comfortable at socially, academically, and are you going to be able to grow as a baseball player? They're the answers that I think you've got to figure out. You can do that in Florida. You can do that in Pennsylvania. You can do that in California. You can do that all over the country. But you have to feel comfortable with the guys that are going to be personally responsible for your development in the classroom and on the baseball field.
Awesome. I think that was really helpful for these guys to hear. So here's something I'm curious about. So the Cape Cod League, and for those of you guys that aren't familiar, it is the league to be in by a long shot. Would you agree with that, Jeff?
Oh my God, yeah. It's the best amateur baseball league in the world.
So you're seeing every single guy in the field is legit. They're all super talented, super toolsy, come from very good programs. what's the difference between the guys who are dudes and the guys who can't handle the cape?
So here's the message that I tell to my players in the Cape Cod League. And there's actually probably a couple parts of this that we can talk about. These guys are ultra talented. This is the top of the food chain. In 2018, the team that I had that year, of the 30 guys that were on that team, 29 of them were drafted the following year. And the only reason the other kid wasn't drafted is because he just wasn't draft eligible. But that happens with a lot of those guys. Let me backtrack, and here's the downside to some of these kids is these kids at the biggest programs in the country. You'd be surprised on how very little, they know about the game. And what I mean by that is they're so talented that they've been programmed to, everything is about measurables and numbers. And we're probably going to talk about this a little bit later too.
Definitely.
And they're less worried about some of the things that are going to actually get them to the next level. So what I tell my guys when they get there is there's only going to be a handful of guys that walk out of this team or out of this league making $1 million. All right. So what is going to be the big separator? Every one of you guys are going to get drafted, but what's going to separate the first rounder from the fifth rounder and the fifth rounder from the 20th rounder at that point? We all know you can play. Every scout knows you can play. You're all going to get drafted. Everybody is of somewhat equal ability. So what is going to separate you from being a millionaire? And I think that's where it comes down to the guys that really care about winning. They're not out there just to showcase themselves. The guys that are willing to lay down the bunt, move a runner over, play for a run, win a game. Ultimately, that's the deciding factor where a lot of guys get drafted, or drafted as high. Can they play the game, and can they play the game the right way? It's hard to project, but the message that we get out to those guys is you guys are all really good. What is going to be the difference from the 30th rounder to the fifth rounder? And usually that comes down to how hard those guys play the game and what's the real reason why you're there. Are you there because you're there to be a millionaire? Because you're there to be drafted in the first round, or you actually care about winning? And the best teams in the Cape has nothing to do with the coaches or the roster that's put together. Who wins that league every single year is the team that, in my eyes, wanted to stay there, play until the end, and win a championship.
That's an awesome answer. That's really cool to hear. And I'm sure that's not what a lot of these guys expected.
Right.
What I'm curious about, so you have that's crazy. You had 29 out of 30 guys drafted, by the way. What are some typical questions scouts are asking you about your guys?
There's not a single question about can they play baseball. None of them, so every year, right around this time, about a month or two leading up to the draft, I will get a phone call from every single scout in the country. And you can ask any of my assistant coaches. I mean, my phone is ringing off the hook. And every one of those questions are, what type of kid is he? How is he off the field? Does he show up on time? Think about it, man. These scouts are putting their draft board together, and they're moving guys from the 30th round to the first round, from the first round to the fifth round. Everybody knows how talented they are. They're all going to play professional baseball. So it goes back to what I said before, is what is the separating factor? Now these guys want to know, if I draft this kid, is he going to embarrass the organization? Is he in it to win it, or is he in it to just for himself, to better himself, or make the money to do it? How does he interact with his host family? Does he show up early? Does he stay late? Does he clean up the dugout? Or is he the entitled kid that packs up his stuff as the game's over and takes off? All of those little intangibles actually matter, and those kids don't see it. Think about it, man. You come from the University of Alabama or Miami, you're not picking up the garbage in the dugout. You're not cleaning up the field. You're not cleaning up the screens. And in the Cape League, you have to do all that. It's the ultimate test, the character test, to see what kind of kid you actually are.
Yeah, I feel like some of these guys need to see like some of the Cape fields to fully understand that. Compare like the U to your field. It's a little bit different.
We're playing on middle school and elementary school field.
Yeah, you guys need to Google this after we get off there.
But this is something that, you just brought up a good point, though, and this is something that I say to scouts a lot, is if you look across college baseball right now, these guys are playing in, 50 to $100 million cathedrals. So this is something that's concerning to me. One of the conversations I have with a lot of these scouts is when you get a kid from Mississippi State who's playing at Mississippi State and they come to the Cape and they're playing on these middle school fields, and their reaction is, man, I got to play on this field for the next 40 games. How is that going to be in minor league baseball for the next 4 years when you're playing in these small little towns with fans of 100, when the best part of your amateur life is playing at Mississippi State, is playing at Kentucky? That's going to be a big transition from the time where these Power 5 schools, these kids have to transition until they get into the big leagues.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's dead on. Corey saw that. He was obviously at a couple small schools, but to say that minor league players are treated better than the ACC and the SEC is ridiculous.
Right.
There might be like 1 or 2 minor league parks in the country that can stack up to some of those fields.
Yep.
So a lot of what you just talked about, as far as like scouts grading your players, how does that work for you as a college coach? Like how much of that is overlap and how much of that doesn't particularly matter?
To me, I take stock in some of it. I like the measurables to a point. I think anything of too much information is bad if you're going to keep going to it. And what I'm worried about with a lot of the numbers and a lot of the stuff that these kids are going through is they're kind of getting ingrained and slaves to just the numbers. And here's the perfect example that I've seen. And this is where it really hit me a couple years ago of how a lot of these kids are so in tune with the numbers compared to their ability. Was I went out to talk to a pitcher. This is probably 2 years ago. And anybody who's a pitcher on this call, you guys are the pitch count. What is the pitch count? What is the pitch count that we can get a pitcher to where he's going to be okay? Is it 110? Is it 120? Is it 90? Is his arm going to explode after 121? How do we get there? And I remember walking out to a mound and talking to a pitcher. And this is where the whole measurable thing really hit me like a sledgehammer. Was I went out and I asked the kid how he feels. And he said, the first thing he said to me was, what's my pitch count? And then I took a step back and I said, I knew his coach told him, his college coach, he's on an 80 pitch count or whatever it might be. And I said, you're at 75 pitches. And he said, yeah, I'm done. I don't feel good. But when I was walking back to the dugout, I'm thinking to myself, if I lied to that kid and told him that he was at 50, he would have told me, I'm good to go. I've got another 2 innings in me. So it's almost like we're forgetting on how the body works and how we feel inning by inning, and we're totally relying on the data and the numbers, and it's starting to take control of us. And a pitcher is going to walk off the field, and the first thing that he wants to see is what was his spin rate. And we have every gadget that you can possibly think of in the Cape, every machine that tells them what the Rhapsodos and everything else, and that's all they care about. They have no idea, hey, if my spin efficiency was really good, that's awesome, even though I just gave up 10 runs in the last 3 innings. So they're being ingrained to the measurables, my point, in my opinion, and less worried about actually going out there and competing for what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and this is, obviously a hot button topic. Whether it's actually debated by coaches is one thing. So I feel like a lot of it's you have your trainers, your instructors, and they're in one camp, and coaches primarily are in the other. But let's kind of backtrack. You said you do like metrics to an extent. What are some that you value? Or like times to use them.
I like pitch. I love to follow pitch efficiency. Guys that are commanding the strike zone. I like guys that are that compete within the numbers. I think the only thing the couple things that I don't like is that, like I said it before, when we fall victim to it all the time. But we don't do a whole lot of scouting reports, especially because there's so many numbers that come in. I've tried to teach our kids, like, how many times do we see it right now with the shifts that are happening in baseball? Everybody's shifting all over the field. Are you doing it because you've got data that backs that up? I would rather my kids to learn to read a swing, to read a pitch, and move all over the field based on what you see rather than what I'm telling you. It drives me nuts when I see somebody taking a card out of their back pocket and looking at every single hitter and running all over the field because of what some guy told you, of what he did his last 20 at-bats or his last 30 at-bats. Everything, in my opinion, has to happen in-game, day by day. There's some of those things that we can use, but from the pitching side from it, I only rely on the biggest measurables of the pitch efficiency, how to get through a game, pitch to contact, staying ahead of hitters, when to attack hitters. Other than that, I don't play a lot of stock in it at all, to be honest with you.
How about offensively? Are there any metrics that you prefer?
Do I prefer?
That you like to see that would interest you?
The older that you get, I think the data changes. For guys that are in high school, I think it's a little bit more lenient. When you get to the Cape and you're facing, 94, 95 on a regular basis, I think you've got to take a lot of that data and throw it out the window because, hitting in hitters counts is what's going to ultimately give you a lot of success. A lot of the knocks that we've had on some of the best players that we've ever been around is this kid's going to be really good if he can only get himself into better counts. We don't have a whole lot of data on a regular basis to give those kids, but at my level in Division III, our job is to put the ball in play, hit the baseball as hard as we possibly can. I'm not going to sit there. We're not going to talk about launch angle. You know why? Because at Division III, on the crappy fields that we play on, there's no bad bounces when you hit the ball in the air. So we're going to do everything we can to hit the ball hard, wherever it might be, get guys on base as much as we possibly can, and try to score as many runs as we can. And the same thing happens in the Cape, other than these guys are coming from programs where everything is, these guys can't go to the bathroom without asking permission. And it's almost like we have to deprogram a lot of these kids to figure out how to play baseball without anybody looking over your shoulder. Another thing that drives me crazy, and our coaches talk about this in the summer, is the on-deck hitter. Some guy goes up and gets punched out on 3 pitches. He comes walking back to the dugout, and the on-deck hitter and the guy that just got punched out are having a detailed conversation of what this guy has. Well, my opinion and your opinion of what this guy has is going to be 2 totally different things. I want to be able to, as much as I can, react by what I hear and what I see, not by what somebody else is telling me, if that makes any sense.
No, I think it does. And to go back to defensive shifting, I feel like that's one thing that just watching amateur baseball for the past 10, 12 years, that literally doesn't happen. It's very rare to see a defense or a defensive player move around the field, make adjustments, swing to swing.
Yeah, I've seen some people don't do it at all. I'd rather see our players do it from what they see rather than me shifting them around. I remember playing a game in the Cape. I won't say the team, but we got to the field for pregame, and there was X's all over the field, everywhere, painted with a spray paint. And somebody from the other dugout would yell the player's name, and he'd yell out 35, and the player would move to an X. Every player would move to an X. It was absolutely absurd and overcoaching like you can't imagine. But I'd rather my shortstop take control or my center fielder take control and move around the field where he feels like he saw something.
No, that's really interesting. I can't believe that they actually marked the field. That's a little.
But we don't
crazy.
teach that anymore either. We don't teach kids how to read swings. And that's a whole other thing about what we see on social media and everything else. I can go on for days.
Since you went there, let's bring up social media. So I look at it as a tool. Like, it can be really useful and it can be really stupid. All these guys are on it. What would be your tips in them navigating it for good, if that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, to take bits and pieces of what you see and make it your own. Tony Gwynn would be rolling over in his grave right now if he had Twitter. But this is what I kind of hit it on it before a little bit with the players that I see in the summer. When I said that I get guys that know very little about baseball, and I said they're ultra talented. If you think about where these kids are now in this generation, what are they trained to do? They go to showcases all the time. So they're actually trained to run the 60 really well. They're trained to take BP really well. They're trained to show off their arms in the outfield or from shortstop, and how hard can we throw the ball off the slope, off the mound. This is what the generation that we're in. They train for this for years, and they're getting lessons on all of this as well. They're paying for lessons in academies or whatever it might be. They're seeing it on Twitter. But what we're missing is, and I see this a lot with the best baseball players in the world, is they're missing out on the other tools. They don't know how to run the bases. They don't know how to go from first to third. They can't hold runners on. They can't feel their position. And these are the things that you don't pay for when you take private lessons. Nobody's ever paid for a lesson to teach me how to go out a base run. It's all the same thing. It's all the hitting, the pitching, and probably some defense mixed in. So I get that part of it. And my advice to anybody is take little bits and pieces of it. Nobody's swing should be the same. Everybody is going to have to be a little different. And as you're hitting with the count, there's got to be some desperation that settles in. When you've got 2 strikes on you, the last thing that you should be worried about is how pretty your swing is. It should be desperate, look silly, put the ball in play, hit the ball hard, and not worried about where my hands are, my feet are, my hips are, or any of this other stuff that we're trying to teach you, on Twitter. So there's parts of it that I like, and then there's parts of it that are just totally out of control, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely all over the place. And like I said before, I think the biggest issue is the lack of, I guess, collaboration between the two sides. Like one side is just working in the cage. And if you want to be good in the cage, there are certain things you practice. But at the end of the day, that doesn't necessarily translate to being on the field, playing the game, and winning games.
Exactly. My job as a coach is to put you in a situation where I feel like you're going to be successful on the field. Put in any situation that I feel like you're going to come across throughout the course of a game over 9 innings. And a lot of times we don't train for that inside of a 70-foot batting tunnel.
So do you have any suggestions for these guys? Because I mean, right now, that's basically all we can do, how to make their training more game-like, which obviously is tough, but put you on the spot.
Just put yourself into the most uncomfortable position that you possibly can. How many guys take BP in a cage hitting off their front foot? Literally hitting off their front foot. Nobody's going to teach that way, but throughout the course of the game, there's going to be 3 or 4 times where you're going to get on your front foot and have to put the ball in play somehow. Nobody ever practices that. One of the things that we put into our program this year, some of our offensive stuff, was trying to put our hitters into the most uncomfortable positions that they possibly can and being able to still make solid contact from there. Training for the unknown. Think about anything that can potentially happen throughout the course of a game and take your BP from there. And like I said before, putting yourselves into good hitters counts. I mean, think about how the numbers go up or down based on you hitting with a certain count. All the data, that's the data that's out there. Train towards the data that actually matters.
No, I think that's awesome advice for all these guys. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit. So this is probably the last question for me, and I'll let these guys ask some as well. So I think because you're head college coach, you coach in the Cape, you have a really unique perspective of what's happening from a recruiting standpoint and from an MLB draft standpoint. What are your expectations? What do you think is going to happen in the next year to college baseball with all the changes we've seen in the last month or two?
It's going to be tough. There's going to be overcrowding of rosters for the next 4 years. I'm close to a lot of the guys that played with me in the Cape for the last couple of years, and a lot of those players don't have programs to go back to. And a lot of those players are going to start filtering down to Division II. A lot of the Division II guys are going to be filtering down to Division III. It's going to be this year, and I want to say the next 3 years. For you guys that are out there right now, it's going to be even more important for you right now to pick the right program, because there's going to be so much shuffling of rosters. And thankfully, the NCAA pushed off a one-time transfer exemption until January. I still think it's going to be a problem, but can you imagine if that passed? It'd be like the wild, wild west of college baseball, where guys are just transferring to different programs. What I really fear is who's going to take the biggest hit in college baseball is probably the mid-major Division I teams, because a lot of those, the better players on those teams are going to wind up going to the ACC, the Power Five conferences, and then they're going to get stuck, holding the bag, and guys are just going to be transferring in between. I'm hoping that we are going to benefit from some of these guys working their way down to D3, but I think there's going to be massive roster inflation across the board for the next couple of years. So if you're looking at schools, you better be careful, and you better do your homework on where you're going, because it's going to be tough. This is a tough thing to navigate through.
Yeah, I really don't think anyone saw this coming, and I'm still surprised the NCAA granted another year for everyone. But I definitely think you're right. You should benefit from it, but at the same time, you're going to have some tough conversations too, just with the added roster, the added numbers.
We're going to have some tough conversations. Is right. I mean, there's a lot of people that were in Keystone uniforms last year that, based on the recruiting class and the guys coming back, the seniors, there's going to be some tough calls. But even with the draft potentially only being 5 rounds this year and possibly next year as well, the roster boom is going to it's going to hurt college baseball for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I think guys going to school for 5 or 6 years is going to become the norm. Which is kind of crazy with how bad tuition is. Thankfully, you guys are pretty affordable.
We came out looking pretty smart, right? Dropping our tuition
in
November, right before all this happened.
Yeah, must have predicted it. All right, guys, that's all I have. I'm sure you guys have some questions. If you haven't noticed, Chev is going to be about as honest as anyone's ever going to be with you. So this is a great time to ask some questions, whether it's about recruiting, whether it's about college baseball. So what do you guys have? You can go chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. While we're waiting on one, I'll show you guys the new facility that they're looking at. All right. Can you guys all see that screen share? So that's going to be a D3 school right there. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, covered hitting facility. It's going to be it's definitely going to be one of the most unique places in the country. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I'll have to find a old picture of it to do some justice, because it was not nice. All right, looks like we have a quiet group.
Come on, guys, come on. Somebody's got to ask a question.
Well, I'm going to call. I'll put somebody on the spot. Savit, you look curious. What do you got? I'll unmute you.
What kind of, the competition between guys that are playing the same position or different classes, how do they kind of work together? Do they because they know they're competing for a spot, but is there a certain do they bond, or how are the teammates together?
They're competitive. Our guys are always going to be competitive. We create an atmosphere where those guys are going to continue to compete. One of the things that we also started a JV program a couple years ago, which gives us the opportunity to play more games. It gives our freshmen and our sophomores opportunities to play. Again, we mentioned it before that you've got to get into the game. You've got to play baseball. So we created our JV team, which is basically, it's one big team that we have, varsity and JV, but it adds 15 games to our schedule. So a lot of those freshmen and sophomores and whoever it might be get opportunity to real baseball in our system. And we also use it for, the best player on our team could play a different position. We start off our year every year in the beginning of February, and we have an idea what our roster and our starting lineup is going to look like. And then it changes 25 times, and we have no idea what our postseason or our playoff run starting lineup is going to be. But that JV program gives more guys opportunities to play and get some live ABs and under our coaching. And I think that's a big benefit, but we're really competitive. A lot of jobs are won in the fall, lost in the winter, and regained again somewhere throughout the season. So we've got, here's a very quick story. We had a player who started in center field for us in the national championship game, from the playoffs, the regionals, the World Series. He didn't play the first 26 games of the season because he got a couple ABs here and there and he struggled, but he was really good in the JV games. If I didn't have that program, or we didn't have that program, we would have never noticed at the time, how good he actually was. And then he cracked into our lineup and ended up playing in the national championship game. So it's just another advantage that we have of creating that game-like atmosphere about playing more baseball games and giving more kids opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I feel like so
Yeah.
many people just assume that, oh, shoot, I'm not playing the first 10 games, I'm out. And I don't think I ever got a lineup card right the first weekend, first month.
Right.
But you got a couple interesting ones over here. You want to check them out? They're both Cape ones. You could pick one.
Who's the most notable player that I've coached in the Whitecaps? I've had guys like Nick Senzel, who's the center fielder with the Cincinnati Reds. Great story about Nick. He was a second baseman at the University of Tennessee, and he was a big physical second baseman. So when he got to the Whitecaps, he had a strong arm, can hit the ball all over the field. And we wanted to create some versatility with him and add value to him as a player because we knew he was going to be good. So we moved him all over the field. We played him at short. Now, 15 years ago, if you were a guy that can play 5 different positions, that wasn't good because you were labeled by scouts in Major League Baseball as somebody that didn't have a position. If you guys are watching Major League Baseball right now, it's totally changed. The Dodgers are now bringing in guys that can play 5 different positions. It's everywhere. So Nick played shortstop, he played third, he played a little bit of an outfield, he played first, he played second. We moved them all over the field. And I think that added value to him in the draft. He was the number 1 college player selected that year and broke into the big leagues last year. But I've had him. I've had Will Smith, the catcher with the Dodgers, on that same team. Aaron Judge was with us, but he was there a year before I got there. But they're the 2 big guys right now that are in the big leagues.
Yeah, and that's quick too. What's that?
Real quick.
2-3 years? Jeez.
Yeah, they've got to the big leagues within 3 years.
Cool. So we got one more on here, and this is an interesting one because I actually don't know this answer. So for guys that are playing in the Cape, how do they also manage like training in season? Like, are you guys lifting? Are you like making swing changes? Like you said, guys playing different positions. What's the player development side look like? Here's
the day of a Brewster Whitecaps player. Those guys get up in the morning, and we have a gym that are, and usually the way it is there's a couple teams that share the same gym, and our organization gives those guys memberships to the gym. So they're in there in the workout, getting a workout in the morning. Then around 12 o'clock is when we'll start doing a lot of early work. Pitchers will come in and do a lot of their flat ground stuff. The hitters will come in, and we mix our early work up into different categories. You heard me say before, there's so much stuff that we want to teach these guys in the summer that we go over that makes them a better baseball player. So one day our early work could be base running, just leads and how to go first to third. We might do some cage work. We might do bunting work. We try to make these guys a complete package, and we do that from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. They get a break. We take BP from 3 to 4:30. And then we obviously start our games anywhere from 6:30, whatever it might be. But it's a long day, but those guys have nothing to do other than that kind of workout, that kind of regimen. If you're in the Cape, you should have some kind of workout philosophy like that because you're going to be doing it in a couple years anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's a legit like minor league game day. That's awesome.
Right.
How many guys do you feel like really struggle with that type of regimen? That's not easy.
No, if you're not that type of guy, then you're probably the guy that's getting drafted in the 30th round or the 40th round, or maybe losing out on an opportunity like that. The guys that are getting drafted high that you're seeing in the big leagues pretty quick are the guys that are really into that kind of workout and that kind of mindset.
Awesome. So let's go one more question. We'll let you get out of here. So we do have some younger guys on here. What advice would you give to someone who's going to be entering their high school this coming fall?
If you're entering high school this fall, is number one, don't hit the panic button. I see a lot of kids who are very eager, and again, I'm the benefit of a lot of these kids. They can't wait to commit to a school for whatever reason, because they feel like their boys are doing it or their friends are doing it, and they're going to get left behind, whatever it might be. Some of the best players I've ever gotten at Keystone, I didn't get until the summer before their college year. So don't feel like there's pressure on you of committing to a school that you're not 100% convinced and comfortable with. And I think that's the biggest mistake that a lot of kids make is, I mean, I've seen guys, I know kids that have committed to 4 different schools, attended 3, and they're still trying to break into the lineup as a 22-year-old freshman or sophomore. Make the right decisions, plan it out the right way, take your time, do your research, do your homework, and find a school that's going to be comfortable with you. But when you're moving into your freshman year, have fun playing baseball, develop at a handful of different positions, see where the game is taking us right now. And like I said, Major League Baseball and the game itself is moving into less one slot positions and rather guys that can play a little bit of everywhere. Those type of kids become very, very valuable on your high school team, your college team, the Cape team, and eventually in a big league baseball.
Yeah, I mean, that's gold right there. Because right now, a lot of these guys are playing travel baseball or playing Legion, and they've been the third baseman for years. What if the third baseman's an all-conference guy in high school? What if, like, you go to Keystone College and they have an All-American who's playing third now? Are you just going to say, oh, well, maybe when he graduates?
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important for these guys to hear. But, yeah, I appreciate your time today. Thank you. Guys, let's all thank Chev.